with these people before you started to photograph them, how you got them to become so comfortable, because you look at some of these photographs and you can just tell that their personality and the life that they've gone through is written all over their faces. And that's not something that I expect that you get when you open the door.
Yeah. And they're in their bedrooms and things like that.
I know, yeah.
Very personal spaces. The shoots varied, but I would say that at minimum, usually, I would tell them before I came over that they should plan on at least spending 2 or 3 hours with me. And it usually was at least 4, maybe 5, maybe longer. We'd stay for dinner and spend a lot of time with them. One family actually invited me to their summer cottage and went there for the weekend. And so it really, like I said, I mean, I had people telling me I was family from day one. And so they really did. There were some people I definitely knew better than others, but there was sort of a great connection from the beginning, and people were pretty comfortable.
Did you feel like the connection was because you also were Jewish and Finnish, and it was sort of
part
like
of
a
it.
familiar?
I think that's part of it. Definitely. I'm also, I'm not that threatening of a person, so I think that's part of it too.
Yeah.
But was there any hesitancy? Because while you're Finnish and Jewish, you're not Finnish Jewish.
Exactly. Not that, I mean...
You're not from that community.
Exactly. No, as I said, I think it just because I do share these common characteristics with them, or that I could talk about my experiences, and they understood a lot of them, and they could talk about theirs, and I understood a lot of them too. At the beginning, like I said, I'm sure there were some people who were like, why do you want to do this, and why are you interested in our community, but for the most part, pretty much, I would say 95% of the people who I spoke with were willing to be photographed and to be part of it. So I think part of it too is kind of this group mentality. Your good friend or your father or your cousin or your sister tells you, this girl came to my house and took pictures of me and it was great and I love the picture. So they trusted me because of that too. So.
Yeah. Oh, did you give your subjects some kind of instructions on what to do when they pose for your photos?
Sometimes, a little bit. What I would do, actually, I was explaining again this morning about I don't know if you guys all noticed the picture of the cantor in the entryway here in the green room, which is in the synagogue, and that was one of the earlier pictures from the project, and I was photographing him in the synagogue in the main chapel in Helsinki, and it's beautiful, but it is really high ceilings, and it's brutal, the light, and I was photographing him for probably 2 hours, and the pictures were not working, and I knew it. And so I decided I was going to go up to the sort of balcony and see if I could photograph from above, and I opened the door to that room by mistake, and knew immediately that that's where I had to make the picture because it was such a beautiful space. So from then on, when I would reach people in their homes, I would ask to look at all the possible spaces, and so I would kind of set up the shot and get the frame right and knew what was going to be in the picture, and then I would have people get in there and we'd kind of talk and have a conversation and see what would happen. And so there's sort of a fluidity, but also a little bit of directing going on there.
With these photos styled, like when you take them, did you make sure things were like, because they all look like sets in IKEA to me or something. Also like crisp and clean edges, and I mean I've been to Europe and I know that a lot of people have really simplified and like colorful and
well, and
sort of
especially
modern.
in Finland, I mean, Finnish design is gorgeous and very beautiful, and there is a lot of clean, modern design in most of their homes. Everybody would be like, oh, I have to clean before you come over, and I always said, I don't need that, it's fine, whatever it is. So there would be some styling in the sense of if something was important and I knew I wanted it in the picture or they wanted it in the picture, we might take it from another room and bring it in. But for the most part, it's really kind of how the space was, and for the most part, they're wearing what they were wearing when I got there. There are a couple cases where I'd have them change if the colors really called for it or something like that. But it's
the colors are really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of them sound.
What about that little girl?
About her? She was amazing. Her name is Ida. She is, I think, about 6 in the picture. So she is one of the people who I photographed who I couldn't communicate with. I don't speak Finnish, but I speak sort of broken Hebrew from my childhood, and so So for some people, I could kind of use that if they didn't speak English, but the majority of the people who I photographed were totally fluent in English, and it worked out fine. So her brother was there, and her mother was there, and her mother was communicating with her, telling her what I was wanting her to do, and she just kind of sat there and with her sort of weight of the world on her shoulders, and I took a picture. So. Yeah.
I may have missed this, but could you just describe the current status of the Jewish Finnish community? Is it in resurgence, or, and you mentioned, because in your material, I think it said your mother left in 47 or something.
I'm sorry? My mother? Yeah, she left as a child, and she wasn't part of the community. She converted as she was older. But the community there, it's kind of stable. It's still around 1,500. It doesn't change very drastically and hasn't much over the years. There are people moving and moving away, and there is intermarriage and things like that happening. But it's, with the influx of some Israelis and with, children being born, it's pretty stable.
Did a lot of the people you met speak Hebrew? And Finnish?
Yeah, pretty much. I was embarrassed all the time when people would tell me they spoke 5 languages. But the students who go to the Jewish day school learn Hebrew there, and then the Israelis spoke Hebrew, and then some other people did too. So yeah, a lot of them do.
Is the community fairly out in public? Like some of the kids had, at least they had whatever, their naming certificate or whatever up in their room. So I wonder if it's up when their friends come over.
Yeah, I don't think I think all of their friends know that they're part of the community, and they're close, coworkers, and everybody knows that. But I don't think it's necessarily known way up in Lapland that there is a community down in but yeah, people are.
Yeah, well, the kid has his naming certificate on his wall.
Right. There is a bar mitzvah. Actually, yeah, the one right behind here.
Dina, did you get a sense? I see that you have a few older people that you photographed and probably weren't able to communicate well with her. But I'm just wondering about if you got any historical stories. I just wonder if they talk about the war, which is very much present in any. If you get to know any Finns at all, they talk about the war, either their parents' situation in the war or their own situation in the war. And I'm wondering if any of that came out.
I did. So the woman who you pointed to over there, she's one of the residents in the retirement home that I mentioned in Helsinki, and there's 15 rooms in the retirement home that were only actually taken up by 5 Jews when I was there, and they open it to the public because it is such a, they don't need the space. So anyway, so that's where I photographed her, and she was actually very lucid and wonderful to speak with, and she spoke English, right? Her daughter and her son-in-law were there too, and so we had some great conversations. But I did actually photograph someone who fought in the war and is the secretary of the Jewish War Veterans in Finland, and he told me some things that I think he had a very interesting experience. So I'm sure some of you or most of you are familiar with the history, and that during the war, when Russia came into Finland, Finland was working with Germany to get the Russians out, right? So there were Jewish Finnish soldiers in the army at the same time having German soldiers right there, and the Jewish war veteran who I was talking about was saying that it felt very strange, and they were praying on Shabbat and keeping kosher and observing Judaism right alongside the German soldiers who dealt with it and lived with it, which was very an interesting experience for him. Any other questions?
Did you see any of your own relatives when you were there? Did you see some of anybody in your mother's family?
A lot of my mother's family is actually in Minnesota already. So I visited a lot of family friends. So I did spend a lot of time with them, and I visited the house that my mother grew up in Solo, and knocked on the door and told them who I was, and said I wanted to see their house, and they let me in, and it was amazing. They sat and had coffee with them, and they showed me the house. It was really great.
Dana, is the use of interior spaces deliberate, accidental?
Pretty deliberate, because again, I really wanted those cultural signifiers so that you could sort of get a sense, or at least the whole idea of what we can know from a photograph is a much bigger conversation, but the idea that, you know, if I was in their personal private spaces, you might be able to see things and come up with some idea in your head of who you think they are. So that was important to me, and so there are some images that I made outside, and whenever I did that, I asked the person who I was photographing to choose the location so that it was a space that was important to them, either because of their Finnish or Jewish heritage, and so that it did make sense to be there. And yeah, I guess I have none of those up on the walls right now, but there are some. And I do, I have a mock-up of the book that I hope to make when it gets published, and there are probably one or two in here, so you guys are, if anybody wants to look at this, we could do that. Any other questions?
How does the Finnish community treat the Jewish community?
Very well. I mean, like I said, it's kind of subtle. You know, I think one of the things that I hear a lot when I show the work or talk to people about it is that you might recognize that they're European or maybe Finnish if you understand those cultural signifiers, but that you don't necessarily know that they're Jewish from looking at the images, and I think that's interesting that they do sort of wear their Judaism subtly, and I think that a lot of people, like I said, aren't aware of the community, but the people who are, you know, fine. I'm happy to be there. Yeah.
Vita shows connections to Adelphi and Loma. How is the Long Island, New York community receptive, their receptivity to your art?
That's a great question.
Could you repeat the question?
She asked how the Long Island community in New York is receptive to my work. I teach at Adelphi University on Long Island, and I actually teach a course that's connected with a seminary and a class of Orthodox Jewish girls. And I've shown, or a past class, the work. This current class hasn't seen it, but they've been interested. Yeah, it's kind of neat to see people you know or feel like you know in other images. You know, that's one of the things that I'm really interested in photography, is how we use it to sort of confirm or establish our own sense of identity and community, that we can look at these images and either see ourselves in them or recognize that that's not you, or and kind of that they can themselves look at these pictures and say, oh yeah, that's my cousin, that's my friend, that's my aunt, or whatever it is, and that you recognize yourselves in them. I think that the camera plays a really important role in that. So. Good. Yeah.
I think you're doing very valuable work.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice. Thank you. I'm very excited to be doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.